Okay, welcome back, everybody. So, okay, so let's get started. We will continue the study of Bitcoin in this class. So, last time we looked at primarily the public ledger part of it, right? How do you maintain the public ledger? How do you make sure that miners sort of agree on what the content of the ledger should be at any given point of time? How do you make sure that nobody can erase things from the public ledger and so on? And as I said before, once you have the public ledger, you can build a variety of different applications on it. And of course, the original application, which is still the most popular application, is that of cryptocurrency. So let's see quickly how you can design cryptocurrencies once you have a public ledger. Well, as you can expect, um, it's not very difficult. If you have a public ledger, you can just maintain a record of all the transactions. Who has how much money, who sent money to whom, how much, on which date, and so on. Now, the main question is who gets to write on this public ledger? The short answer is, of course, the miner who mines the next block. How do we make sure that that miner does not write unauthorized information on this public ledger? This is ensured by using digital signatures. So if your money is being transferred, then you need to digitally sign a statement that you are the one transferring this money. Okay. So let's see how spending money works. The only way new coins or new money is created in Bitcoin is via the mining process. Whenever a new block is mined, some number of coins just magically appear in the public key of the miner who mined the next block. And now that miner can, of course, transfer this money to somebody else, who in turn can then transfer to somebody else. And then basically your whole process of electronic commerce can start. So let me just say in advance that this is somewhat oversimplified. And I'm ignoring many of the implementation details here. So let's say Alice wants to transfer 1 Bitcoin to Bob. So Alice needs to digitally sign a statement. So let's say Alice's public key is PK1. Bob's public key is PK2, and Alice wants to transfer 1 Bitcoin to Bob. So Alice signs using SK1, which is the secret key corresponding to PK1, the following statement. I transfer 1 coin to PK2. Maybe let's even write PK1 here. So I am PK1, I transfer 1 coin to PK2. Okay, and then you broadcast. You broadcast this statement over the network. All the miners who are competing to mine the next block will hopefully see this statement. And by the way, you also need to propose a transaction fee. And that's the part which I am ignoring right now. But in reality, you can imagine that there's another signed statement from Alice that the miner who includes my statement in the blockchain gets, let's say, 1% of a Bitcoin. And then you broadcast this entire signed statement. Each miner will look at the statement and they will decide whether or not the statement is worth including in the next block. Okay. If the transaction fee is large enough, hopefully most miners will decide that this is worth including. So most miners will add the statement to the information page, the II. Okay. And then they are hashing, right? They are trying to solve the next puzzle. If the next puzzle is solved, then that II, which presumably includes the statement, goes on the blockchain. Okay. So before miners do that, miners run the following test. Miners test the following. First, the signature is valid, and second, PK1 has enough money. In fact, in Bitcoin, you specifically need to point to the coin and its serial number, which coin you're spending. But let's ignore that for now. Okay. So if the miners are able to test that the signature is valid and PK1 has enough money, only then the miners are supposed to add it to the next block. If a malicious miner decides to ignore that, well, they can do that, but then their block which they mine will not even be considered to be valid. And every other miner will not accept that as the correct puzzle solution. Okay. So minus test, and then some miner includes this in the next block. And then the transaction is not yet finalized because, as I said last time, the last block and in fact the last few blocks may actually get erased because of forking. There might be multiple fork and maybe this is not the fork which wins. So you wait for a few blocks. And once this block is sort of deep enough inside the blockchain, you are sure that this transaction is going to stay. Okay. So this is basically the cryptocurrency part, pretty simple application. And let's see a couple of points. So maybe let me ask you a few things. So by the way, when you wait for a few blocks, it can be up to an hour for the transaction to be confirmed, right? Okay, so let me ask you a few questions. So let's say Alice has a new idea. Alice is not happy with this delay. You know, when you go to a store, you pay for an item, you don't want to wait 1 hour for your payment to go through, right? So what if Alice just sends this signed statement to Bob? So rather than Alice and Bob really waiting for a long time for this transaction to appear, Alice just signs the statement, just sends it to Bob. Bob checks, make sure Alice has a sufficient number of coins. And if that happens, Bob, just ships the goods or whatever. And then, of course, Bob can broadcast this statement, make sure that this is included in the blockchain, right? Where the statement is coming from, that does not make much difference. The statement is digitally signed by Alice, and presumably that's all that matters. So would this work? If this works, obviously, then the transactions will become instantaneous. So does this work or is there a problem? Yeah, there's a correct answer in the chat that the problem here is double spending attacks. So it doesn't work because of double spending, right? Alice might have one Bitcoin, and at the same time, Alice might send a signed statement to Bob, Charlie, and multiple other people, right? And eventually only one of them is going to get paid. Everybody else just loses out. So a few questions just to confirm: is the transaction fee included in the message signed by SK? Yes, that is correct. Out of curiosity, what has been the longest switch of one fork branch to the other, whether malicious or otherwise? I think it's almost never more than 1 or 2. Bitcoin recommends 6, but I don't think we have ever seen us getting anywhere close to 6, a fork of length 6. So another question is, let's say now our recipient Bob is malicious, and Bob takes this signed statement. Bob collects 1 Bitcoin, and then Bob sort of just tries to replay the same statement again. And hopefully try to get another Bitcoin. So will this work or no?
Like, what is the advantage that Bob gets by doing the replay attack? Like, he can get some valid transaction only and then mine and get the Bitcoin. Like, what's the point of doing the replay, like a false thing?
Well, Bob is trying to get another Bitcoin transferred from Alice to Bob, just repeating the last transaction.
Okay, okay. Sorry, sir.
Yeah, so as I wrote here, a replay attack is actually possible. So that's why I'm saying that this is somewhat oversimplified, but actually in reality, there are some like coin identifiers which are included. And once that coin is spent, you know, Alice no longer has that coin. So replay attack also is not possible. Okay, another question maybe. So now we have this whole blockchain. Okay. Let's say someone modifies a previous block. So we have this whole blockchain, right? And let's say there's a miner or a user who is, for example, trying to modify this block. What do I mean by modifying this block? Taking the information included in this block and maybe just, let's say, deleting one of the transactions. So is this possible? Why or why not? Obviously, this should not be possible, but why not?
So I think any honest node will never, like, only accept new blocks at the end of the current list, not in the middle of the list.
Well, yeah, that's fine. But what about new honest nodes which are joining?
Yeah, but like 51% will never happen, right? So
What do you mean 51%? I mean, like, I'm a new honest node. I join, and then there are 2 versions going around. One was the original one and the other one was the one where information was deleted from here. So how do I recognize which one is the correct one?
You can like ask, say 10 people and say what the majority comes out instead of
Yeah,
just.
that's not the assumption we make in Bitcoin. The Bitcoin assumption is not that majority of the miners are honest, but rather majority of the computing power is honest. And this is for a good reason, because I'm an adversary. I can create like million different fake identities. And that's not very expensive to do. Yeah. So there is a very good answer in the chat. If you try to modify this block, then basically that invalidates all the puzzle solutions from this point onwards. Okay? Because why? Because remember that what was this block bi plus 1? Let's call this block bi. Okay? And let's say I modify ii. So ii becomes ii prime. And then there is a couple of other things. Then I need to try many different nonces here. First of all, to make sure that I get a bunch of zeros. And note that this was supposed to be bi plus 1. But now the value of bi plus 1 will change. So it will become bi plus 1 prime, right? And then even if you're not changing this block, because bi plus 1 changed to bi plus 1 prime, you still have to redo this puzzle. The input to the hash changed. So basically all the puzzle solutions become invalidated, right? And then basically the idea here is our rule, which was that longest chain wins. That comes to your advantage. I change something here. I have to create all these blocks. Let's say I don't have majority of the computing power. Then the chain which I create from this point onwards will be smaller than the main chain. And then my version of the truth will be discarded. And the deeper I go in the blockchain, the harder this attack becomes.
Sir, I have a small question.
Yeah.
Sir, so for the first one where you said Alice just sends the same statement again to Bob, right? So like assume that we don't have the coin identifiers, right? So like or even when you are sending it to Bob, Charlie, and say Rohan also, right? So like won't they check Alice's current balance and then only add that coin? So in the end, like if Alice has only one coin, like after so one spending happens, because the Alice's balance becomes zero, the even without coin identifiers, nothing like that will happen.
So you're talking about question 1
Yeah,
or,
question one.
or 2?
One,
So
one, one.
in question 1, my proposal was that Alice just sends the signed statement to Bob, and Bob just checks the digital signature, and Bob checks the balance which Alice has. But Bob doesn't try to actively put it on the blockchain yet, because that will take several minutes or an hour. And then my point was that, of course, Bob can make sure that the statement is valid and so on, but Bob can never be sure that Alice is not simultaneously sending this to many people.
Yeah, but even if Alice was sending, right,
Mhm.
and like somebody else put some transaction on the blockchain, and now when Bob is putting, because there is a new block, Bob has to verify that now whether Alice has not. So Bob will never, like the double spending will never happen.
Yeah, double spending will never happen, but Bob has been cheated, right? So here I'm not saying that this is a problem for the blockchain. I'm saying this is a problem for Bob. If Bob accepts the payment without first putting it on the blockchain and without first making sure that this appears on the blockchain, Bob is
Oh,
not covered.
okay. No, nice. Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
And that is what I meant by double spending, sending it to Bob and Charlie at the same time, both of them accepting without talking to the blockchain first.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. Now let me get to this information part. How do you arrange information in the blockchain? And this is done in the form of what is known as Merkle trees. So suppose you are not a heavy miner, you are a user. Let's say you are Bob, right? And you know, Alice pays you maybe 1 Bitcoin or something like that. You just want to verify that Alice paid you 1 Bitcoin. You have no interest in going through gigabytes of transactions and things like that, right? So you're only interested in a specific transaction. So what are the options? So let's say this is our blockchain for now. So the first option is Bob can ask Alice for example, the block number, or let's say the block ID slash the transaction ID. Okay, and then hopefully Bob can go ahead and Bob can just download this block, and in particular even just the transaction in that block, and Bob can make sure that this transaction indeed appears in the blockchain. But now, yeah, so this might be one of the proposals. Bob just downloads that transaction or that block. So now the problem is, of course, you can download this transaction, you can make sure that this is there, but where do you download the chain from? Where do you download the blockchain from? Presumably it's a peer-to-peer network, so you just connect to one of the random nodes, you ask that node to send this block to you, right? But then you are trusting this node. Maybe this block actually never appears in the blockchain, and this node maybe is colluding with Alice and just sends you some fake information. You see your transaction over there and you are happy, right? So you don't want to do that. You are interested in this particular transaction, but you would like to verify. You would like to have good confidence in this transaction, right? So then the only way for you would be to start with the Genesis block. You know what the Genesis block is. That already appears in the code of Bitcoin. And basically download the whole chain and verify all hashes. So that is another approach, right? You start with the Genesis block, you download the whole chain, which means that you also need to download the entire block, the whole pages, and essentially every transaction ever. And you keep verifying by hashing and seeing that each hash indeed starts with a bunch of zeros. And then you get to the block which you want. Then you can look up the transaction which you're interested in. Okay. But this seems very sort of unsatisfactory. Even a small user, you have to download like gigabytes and gigabytes of data, even if you're interested in just a single transaction, right? So Merkle trees try to solve this problem. In fact, let me not even go to Merkle trees right now. Okay, let me just propose a very small change to the blockchain system, which will essentially like solve this problem to a large extent. And then Merkle trees make it even better. It's like cherry on top. So what we will do is you change the puzzle. Well, change compared to what we discussed last time. This is how it was always in the Bitcoin system. So change the puzzle, you put the previous block, and then you put the hash of the information which you want to write in the next block. And this is, by the way, a collision resistant hash function. Let me write small h here to just to drive home the point that these hash functions can be different. They serve different purposes. And then you have your nonce, and then you have your public key, and then you make sure that this starts with a bunch of zeros. Okay, and note that in any given block, this is like the output of a hash, pretty small size. This is a nonce, which is like a 100-bit, 200-bit number. This is a public key, which is again very small, several hundred bits. But if you look at this information, II, right? That's the list of all the transactions in this block. And in Bitcoin, for example, it can be a megabyte. So on the other hand, if my puzzle depends only on the hash of this information rather than this entire information, then that's great, because then Bob can just download the hash of the information at every point, can still continue to verify all the puzzle solutions. And only when Bob comes here, Bob will download the entire information list. Okay, because that is the block which Bob is really interested in, and that is the block where Bob's transaction takes place. Okay, so that's the idea. Now, for, let's call this block jth block. For every I not equal to j, Bob downloads. And when I mean download, you use peer-to-peer network. Even if somebody is feeding you false information, that's fine, you can detect it. Bob downloads just the hash of all the transactions. And for I equals j, Bob downloads the hash, of course, as well as the whole list of transactions. Okay, and then Bob checks all puzzle solutions. Because Bob has the entire input now, for every block, Bob can just hash, right? And just checks if the output indeed starts with a bunch of zeros. And if all of the puzzle solutions are correct, including this puzzle solution, then Bob knows that II is legitimate, and Bob can look up the transaction, make sure it appears in the blockchain. Okay, any questions about this so far? And why am I using a hash function here? What type of hash function this small h should be? Is this a one-way function or what? Yeah, good answer. So here the hash function is a collision resistant hash function. And why is that? This is because, say, yeah. Suppose it just happens that h of I and h of I prime are equal. Okay. And now only the hash output is included in the puzzle solution. Okay, then this is a problem. Then basically nobody can tell whether uh, this is the correct list of transaction or this one, right? Because with either one, the puzzle remains the same. So I can change II to II prime. Blockchain basically remains the same. And then there's a problem. You cannot distinguish what is the right version of the block from the wrong version of the block. Okay, so you don't want something like this to happen. And as long as this doesn't happen, you are fine, right? I mean, the hash is included in the block, and if the hash sort of fixes a unique input, at least computationally fixes a unique input, then you know that that nobody can change that input, which is the list of transactions. Okay, so this is good, but we would like to do something even better. Here, at least you had to download this whole sort of this whole block. Of course, that is the block in which you are interested in, but you're just interested in a single transaction in this block, right? Maybe we don't need to download this entire block. So for that purpose, you have Merkle trees. So by the way, for Bitcoin, because the block size is just a megabyte, I don't think this optimization is that important, but you know, people are talking about increasing the block size and things like that. Once you do that, these optimizations start playing a bigger role. Okay, and I should also mention that Merkle trees is an old concept in cryptography. It was introduced in 1970s, so they have been around a lot longer than any of the cryptocurrencies. Okay, good. So let's see. Let's look at this idea. First, I'll show you an optimization which will cut down the data which Bob has to download by a factor of 2. And then we will be able to cut it down even more than that. Okay, so maybe let me abstract out the problem first, because it's a concept which is used in a lot of different applications in cryptography. So here the problem can be seen as follows. So you have a client which maybe has very small storage, and then you have a server. Okay, the problem with the client is that client can only store very little information. So client has maybe a huge list of transactions. So let's call these transactions T1, T2, up to Tn. Client would like to offload all these transactions to the server so that server can store these transactions. And then later on, client would like to be able to download a specific transaction, let's say Ti, right? But client doesn't trust the server as far as integrity is concerned. So what is the option for the client here? So one option is, let's call it option 1. Client stores just the hash of all the transactions. And let's say the server stores the transactions themselves. Okay, so client is storing something which is very small. because you have hash functions where regardless of how large the input is, the output size is always like 160 bits or something like that. But what is the problem with this solution? So client is a mobile device which really cannot store much. And then say later, client wants to retrieve, let's say, TI. How would the client be able to do that? Right? If the client just queries the server, gets just TI, client is not sure that the server is indeed sending the correct value. So what can we do here? So I guess the only option which really you can try here is client downloads the whole list of transactions. And then client can hash all of these, and client can match this with the value that it is storing, right? If the value matches, then client is sure that this whole list of transactions has not been modified. This is still intact. But now the problem is not only you need large bandwidth, but again, you need large storage, right? Client first has to download these transactions in the memory, then hash them. So this is not all that impressive. Here is another option. How about dividing this list of transactions into two equal parts? So let me call the client C and the server is S. What if client stores H1, which is the hash of the first half, to let's say Tn by 2, and H2, which is the hash of the second half of the transactions. Tn. And then server, just like last time, server stores all the transactions. So now, say client wants some transaction, let's call it, let's take a concrete example. Let's say client wants the transaction T1. So does anybody see how client can get that and make sure that it has not been modified? Yeah, good answer. The client just needs to modify. Client just needs to download the first half. So C gets T1 to Tn by 2, right? Then client will hash all these transactions and match with H1, which it is storing, of course. If the hash passes, then client knows that all these transactions have not been tampered with, and then client basically has T1. Okay. So now you can observe that the bandwidth has been reduced in half. So bandwidth, or maybe let me call it communication. And here, yeah, the communication reduces by a factor of 2 because now you are only downloading half of the transactions. And storage, on the other hand, increases by a factor of 2. And by storage here, I'm only referring to the long-term storage. Okay, so this is maybe a little bit better, but we are not too happy with the storage increasing by a factor of 2. So any ideas on how we can achieve reduced communication without increased storage? So here is an idea. Maybe the client even hashes these H1 and H2 and just stores the hash of these values. So client stores H equals H1 comma H2. So let me not abuse the notation here. Let me call it, what should I call it? Let's say H3, okay. Okay, and server stores H1, H2 and all the transactions. Okay, so client is just storing a single value now again. Now, what happens when client wants T1? What do we download? So if client wants T1, then client will download H1 and H2, and then the first half of the transactions, T1 to Tn by 2. Okay, and the client will run the following checks. The first check is make sure that H3, which the client is storing, is that equal to hash of H1 and H2. If this check passes, then the client knows that it has been able to retrieve H1 and H2, the correct version without any tampering. And now that client has confidence in H1 and H2, which were downloaded from the server, client can check whether H1 is equal to hash of all this first half of the transactions. Okay, and if these two checks pass, client has confidence that the first half of the transactions which he downloaded has not been tampered with, and hence you can retrieve T1. Okay, so what is going on here is we are doing something like the following. So we have all these values. T1, T2 up to Tn by 2 and Tn by 2 plus 1 up to Tn. So you take all of these and you hash them to get H1. You take all of these, hash them to get H2, and the hash of these is H, which is the only thing that the client will store. And here, of course, the problem is that we only cut down the communication by approximately a factor of 2. Can we do better than that? Yes, absolutely. And for that, we will have to use a tree. So the tree, which is called as the Merkle tree, it works something like the following. So assume for simplicity, n is a power of 2. If it is not, you can add junk transactions or empty transactions or whatever. And the transactions will be the leaves of a tree. T3, T4, and Tn minus 1, Tn. Okay. You take the first two, you hash them together. Okay, you take two at a time, you hash them together. So now here, if you look at this level, the number of nodes has been cut down by a factor of 2. And then again, you keep repeating this process. And finally, you will end up with the root. And this was H3. Right? And root is what will be stored by the client. And coming to blockchain, root is the only thing that will appear in the blockchain or in the blockchain puzzle description. Let me call the root, let's say, H. Okay, let me just call it H. So now let's say, okay, let me call it H prime. Just let's be consistent here. So now C stores H prime, and let's say C is only interested in the first transaction T1. Okay, now it's a little bit tricky. So what do you download now? S stores basically the whole tree. The S stores all the transactions, all the intermediate leaves in the tree, and so on. So how does C download T1 and verify that indeed T1 is correct? Okay, so let's see. C downloads T1 and all red nodes. So this is T1. This is what C will download. C will also download its sibling. Using these, C can already compute this value. So this value will be computed by C. C can download this node. Given this and this value can be computed by C. Then C downloads this node, and this can be computed by C. So C downloads all the red nodes. Then C can compute the root H prime, and C can then match with the stored value. And if this check passes, the values match, then C can be sure that none of these values has been modified. Because if you modify even a single value out of these, the hash output will change. And the proof, which we will skip here, it just relies on the fact that H is a collision resistant hash function, or H comes from a collision resistant hash function family.
Sir, I have a small question. So, like when we discuss CRHF families, like we always said that the person who is hashing first samples an H and then use it to sample, and this sampling is the property that gives us the guarantee that no collisions will happen or the adversary won't have a hard-coded collision. But now in this case, since like the client when it needs to compute, can't it sample a different hash function than the first one it used? Or like in blockchain, if we are using this in blockchain and like 30 people are there, can't they sample different parts of the CHRF family? And if they are sampling the same thing, then adversary can always find a collision in them.
So, I mean, one way of thinking about it is that the hash function has already been sampled for all of us, and the hash function is like SHA-256. So that's really the way it works in practice. The Bitcoin system specifies the hash function which we will use, and that's just everybody uses. And until somebody can show us collisions in that hash function, we will continue to use that. So that's typically how it works in practice. Like people used to use MD5 at some point, and then there was a team of researchers from China who found collisions in MD5. They published the paper, and sort of everybody immediately moved away from that.
Okay, so SHA-256 like comes from a family of CRHFs and family of hash functions that is a CRHF, and we use one of them for the Merkle trees.
Yeah, SHA-256, you can think of it as a single hash function rather than coming from a family. But one way of thinking about it is like the parameters for SHA-256 when they were fixed, that can be seen as sampling from a family.
Okay, and like when you were discussing before, you especially mentioned that the hash function that we use for blockchain and here are different, but like we are using the same function, but it works because it is also a CRHF.
Yeah, I mean, for example, for the puzzle solutions, you really want to use random oracles. A random
Right.
oracle is like a super hash function. It's a one-way hash function. It's a CRHF. It's like a pseudo-random function. Everything inbuilt. So you can use the same hash function.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So how many nodes did you need to download here? So approximately something like log n nodes. Downloaded, because log n is the depth of the tree, and basically like you are downloading this. So it really depends on the depth of the tree, how many nodes you need to download. So we started with the solution which required us to download n nodes. And then we went to n by 2. And then this tree solution really allows us to go all the way to log n. And log n is like really small, it's exponentially small. If you have like 2 to the power 100 transactions, you just need to download like 100 nodes, which is nothing compared to 2 to the power 100. So Merkle trees are used in a variety of things. The client server scenario, which I talked about, that's of course not specific to blockchains. You really can use it for client and server. Merkle trees are also known as, can also be used for signing several messages, all of which are individually verifiable. These are known as batch signature schemes or batch message signing. And not just Bitcoin, like almost all the cryptocurrencies out there use Merkle trees in one way or other. Okay, any questions before we move on?
So one small doubt, like even now, like for the blockchain, like I need to download the hash of every the information of each block, right? And to limit the information that I need for the block for which transaction I need to check, for that we are using the Merkle trees.
You don't need to download the information in every block, just the hash of the information.
Yeah, hash of the information of every block, and for the block that I need to verify the transaction, then I use the Merkle trees to reduce even that.
Yeah. Yeah. For the transaction which you're interested in, for that block, you will end up downloading something like log n values.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So another thing to keep in mind with Bitcoin is Bitcoin has sort of a rudimentary scripting language. And as far as I understand, the scripting language which was originally proposed in Bitcoin was actually slightly more powerful, but what is implemented currently over the network is much more limited. The scripting language is kind of a conditional transfer of money. So earlier, the way Alice would transfer money to Bob is sort of giving an unconditional statement that I hereby transfer 1 Bitcoin to Bob, right? But Alice can broadcast statements like the following: that I transfer one coin to Bob if and only if Bob posts some signed statement, and let's say signed contract on blockchain. So yeah, we can think about, let's say I am the landlord, and I want to make sure that you will pay me the security deposit before we sign anything. So then I can ask the tenant to post a signed statement on the blockchain that the tenant's coin will be automatically transferred once I post the signed contract, let's say the signed lease on the blockchain. Right? And then the tenant can post the statement on the blockchain, and the actual transfer will only happen if I post the signed contract. And what is this? What do I mean by the signed contract? Who decides whether this contract is signed or not? There's like a program. So essentially, another way of writing it, which might be more accurate, if Bob posts something on which the program P, let's say, will output 1. Okay, and this program P can be written in some language. It's like Solidity for Ethereum, and there are many other smart contract language. which we can talk about. So Ethereum's smart contract language, which is Solidity, is much more powerful compared to the Bitcoin one. But even in Bitcoin, you can do a limited number of things. Right? And here the nice thing is that this transfer is automatically done by the miners. Once you post this signed statement, the contract is automatically invoked. The program P will be called as the smart contract here, and it will be run by the miners, and the money will be automatically transferred. And here, the coin which you put, which has not yet been transferred, that coin goes to escrow in some sense. So here in this statement, if Bob never posts anything on the blockchain, then this coin is gone. It has gone to limbo. It can never be recovered. So one solution to that is you put some time limit. Something on which program will output 1 within, let's say, 7 days. And then if within 7 days Bob does post something like this, then Bob gets this coin. Otherwise, presumably this coin will go back to Alice, minus some transaction fee or something like that. But that shows the danger of writing smart contracts. If you make a mistake, you can actually delete money. You can send money to based on conditions which can never be fulfilled and things like that. And unless you are careful, you can never get back this money. And we have seen this happening time and again in Ethereum, for example. In Ethereum, there was a company, I forgot the name now. Yeah, so they made a programming error which sort of which forced them to delete something like $90 million worth of assets, worth of Ethereum. Then that same company made another error and ended up deleting like $400 million worth of coins. So if you are a programmer working in this area, you have to be very careful.
So, but to Bob to post something on the blockchain, unless Bob is a miner, Bob also needs to request someone that, like, Bob needs to transfer some coins to someone, right? And in that message, he can post that the contract thing, right? So for basically to Bob to post something on the blockchain, also Bob also needs to do some transfer, right? Or Bob needs to mine a block or something like you can't just like Bob can't just go and write on blockchain, right?
I mean, by posting, you mean we are all users, right? Alice and Bob are users. They are not miners. So when we talk about posting, we really mean like just broadcasting the transaction to the miners and hoping that the miners will include it on the blockchain.
Yeah, but if I'm broadcasting something to the miner, I need to pay miner some fees, right?
Yeah, yeah. So transaction fees are implicit everywhere. Everybody needs to pay transaction fees.
Okay. Yeah, like logically, like if I'm Alice is doing something for Bob, then Bob should not end up paying money for the contract only, right?
Well, in the contract, you can specify who pays the transaction fee and so on. But here we are not talking about transaction fee. This transfer of one coin to Bob, that's like much more than any transaction fee. Transaction fee in Bitcoin can even be the order of a few cents.
Oh, I did not know it was that small. I thought it was like $100 to $200. Okay.
No. Okay. So you can actually even pay to a script rather than pay to a person. So script will reside at some address, which means that the script will have some public key, and I can transfer some money to the script. And that script can be, for example, a banking smart contract or something like that. And that script essentially is storing my money. And then that script has some condition under which I can recover my money, or I can transfer it to somebody else. So these type of scripts are actually the most popular in Ethereum. Like just they just have the custody of your money, and the way they are written, like there are some conditions you can get back your money. So let's talk about some of the limitations of Bitcoin. Bitcoin was, of course, the first major cryptocurrency which was proposed, and it has several limitations because of which there's a lot of active research which is going on in this area. The first problem which many people talk about is scalability of Bitcoin. So in Bitcoin, as I said, there's a limit on how many transactions can appear in any given block. The size of a block is 1 megabyte, which puts a limit on how many transactions there can be. We know that every 10 minutes we can only have a single block. So that puts the limit somewhere around, I believe it's something like 7 transactions per second. And if you look at large payment processors, for example, the Visa network. So Visa is something like 5,000 transactions per second. So Bitcoin simply is not designed to be able to handle this type of volume of transactions. So one option which people have discussed in past is, of course, just increase the size of the block to something like 2 megabyte or 5 megabyte. That seems like an easy solution. But the problem with all these cryptocurrencies is that because there's no central authority, there's like, in case of Bitcoin, there's not even a foundation which can dictate how this change can be made and so on. Everything is very chaotic. Any change which you will do, that will almost surely end up bifurcating the currency into 2 versions. There'll be a set of miners running the old version, there'll be a set of miners running the new version, and then sort of, you will have, like, for example, in Ethereum, you have Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. And even the prices for these versions will trade separately and so on. So making any kind of change, at least for Bitcoin, is just very, very difficult. And even forgetting about the logistics of making a change, there is a downside to increasing the block size in Bitcoin. So let's say I increase it from one megabyte to something larger. Let's say 10 megabyte. This also means that blocks take longer to propagate, right? Which also means that there will be more forks, because forks depend on the network delay. If the network delay increases, you will see more forks. So that's one of the problems. There have been like many proposals to overcome this problem of scalability. Potentially a harder problem is that of transaction delays. So another problem in Bitcoin is, like, at least the official recommendation is to wait for 1 hour after the point when your transaction gets into the blockchain, to make sure that the transaction will not be erased because of forking and things like that. But this is never going to work in practice. If Bitcoin has to see widespread deployment, you cannot have people waiting for an hour before the transaction is finalized, right? So you need something which is almost instantaneous, or much faster than Bitcoin. And Ethereum does that. Ethereum has uh, a confirmation time of several minutes, maybe something like tens of minutes, but still nowhere close to instantaneous. And essentially, like, there are no good solutions to this problem so far. For small transactions, people have come up with various proposals to make them instantaneous, but then there's always some chance that the transaction will be raised, you end up losing money. Like, you can do transactions instantaneously, I can give you the product which you purchased, but there's always some chance that later on the transaction might get reversed. So another problem is Bitcoin only has weak anonymity. So in Bitcoin, I operate only under my public key. My public key is my address. My public key is not necessarily linked to my identity. But the problem is, if I start tracking a single public key, I can actually get the complete pattern of transactions which this public key was involved in, right? So let's say Alice and Bob, they do a lot of transactions with each other. And let's say for some reason, maybe some offline method, the public key of Alice becomes known to the attackers, right? And the attackers know that Alice has a lot of transactions with Bob. Then, the attackers can go to the transaction history and attackers can see who Alice was transacting with. And the attackers can obtain Bob's public key as well with high confidence, right? So, so it's like you're operating under a pseudonym. It's like, let's say you cover your face and maybe your body entirely, but then you go to the market, you buy the same things which you usually buy. You talk to the same people and so on. So maybe this covering your face might help you to some extent, but there are patterns which can be uncovered here. And in practice, people have launched several attacks on the Bitcoin network, and people have been able to de-anonymize like certain entities, certain transactions, and so on. So we do have good solutions to the problem of weak anonymity, fortunately. There's something which is known as Zcash. Here, Z stands for zero knowledge proofs, which is something which we will look at a later point. We will also look at how Zcash works. So in Zcash, the different transactions, they are all unlinkable. I cannot really target a specific public key and make a list of all the transactions and see which other public key that public key is talking to. In Zcash, like every transaction is separate. You can look at any two transactions, but you will not be able to see if there is any common party involved in these two transactions. So Zcash it's a nice idea, and yeah, it's also a publicly tradable cryptocurrency. I think even the market cap of Zcash was over $1 billion at some point. I'm not sure where it stands right now. Then another problem is updating the blockchain. I already talked about this a little bit, but there are two ways of updating the blockchain. So one is what is known as a soft fork, and one is a hard fork. A hard fork almost always ends up creating two different versions of the currency. A soft fork, usually not. A soft fork is like something which is very clever. So in soft fork, unpatched miners lose. So again, here I'm referring to the update as the patch. So here you want to give some incentive for the miners to patch their code and get it to the latest version. And the way this is done is by making sure that these miners which don't patch the code will end up losing. And the way this is done is that the miners who have patched their code, they will reject the blocks which are mined by unpatched miners. But the other way around is not true. If you are a patched miner, unpatched miners will still continue to accept your blocks. Okay, so as an example, let's say you want to delete a certain instruction in the programming language. In your smart contract programming language, right? So the patched miners will no longer accept this instruction as valid, and any smart contract which contains this instruction will be rejected as invalid. On the other hand, patched miners, of course, they are never going to use this instruction. So unpatched miners have no reason to reject anything which is done by the patched miners. But the other way around, of course, patched miners might reject transactions of unpatched miners. So at some point, the unpatched miners will realize that they are losing money, and people are not accepting their work as valid and things like that. So they have all the incentives to patch and sort of become up to date. On the other hand, hard fork, there's no compatibility between patched and unpatched miners. Unpatched miners might reject patched miners. The other way around also may or may not happen. And in that case, you might have two different versions of the cryptocurrency, which might start trading separately. Then another problem is usability. So for example, if you think about traditional banking, right? Let's say you forget your password. You can always go to the branch, you can call up your bank, have them reset the password, and then you're back in your account again. If you forget your password, you don't lose your money. In Bitcoin, that's not true. There's no central party. If you end up losing your secret key, let's say your hard drive crashed or something like that, stolen or something like that, there's no bank to go to. There's no central authority which can help you. You are basically on your own. Most likely, you will end up losing all your money. In fact, we have even seen some funny examples where, like, there's somebody who joined Bitcoin system at some early date, and they had this key, which was in some hard drive or maybe some USB drive, which they threw away. And then later on, they realized that the coins attached to that secret key have like drastically gone up in value. They're valued at like something like $50 million or $100 million now. And then they are like frantically searching for this USB drive. So somebody, in fact, accidentally threw this key in trash, and then they started searching. They hired like a company to search basically the entire garbage coming from the city, and then eventually the city officials said that you cannot do that. This is illegal. So they ended up losing all their money. And similarly, if you're hacked, somebody steals your secret key, they can just transfer all your coins to some other address, and then again, like, not really any real recourse that you have here. So there has been some research on this usability as well. So one of the projects which we are working on at CMU is bringing something like two-factor authentication to blockchains. And you want to do it in a way so that your anonymity is not violated, right? You don't want to put your phone number or your email address publicly on the blockchain. So it's an interesting technical challenge. Can you have two-factor authentication on blockchain without sort of violating the anonymity of the parties? Another problem is privacy. So on blockchains, everything is public. The code of the smart contract which you put on the blockchain is public. All the transactions are public, even though you have some pseudonyms to protect yourself. Everything with the smart contract, the input, the intermediate state, the outputs which the smart contract have, they're all public. You cannot really store private, encrypted, access controlled data on the blockchain. So there has been a lot of research in this direction as well. This is also something which we are working on at CMU. Can you store sensitive data on the blockchain and make sure that it can only be accessed by authorized parties and nobody else? And can you make private smart contract, encrypted smart contracts, so that miners can still execute that contract, but the terms and conditions of the contract, for example, can be hidden. This is also a very exciting research direction. So next time we will look at some of the other cryptocurrencies which have been sort of making some progress in terms of adoption, in terms of solving technical problems, and so on. So next time we will look at like what is known as altcoins, and we will also talk about proof of work and proof of stake.